I always go either in the afternoon or the evening. And this is the first kind of like sunrise hike I've done there.
Uh
It will not be the last.
huh.
It was
Sweet.
it was fantastic. I mean,
That's awesome.
just literally trail by ourselves.
Yeah.
So it's a loop, and to like really get some mileage in, because like it's 3 miles just as like, kind of like an in. You do one loop, you do like the little curly Q around, and then you come back in.
Yeah.
And so it's just 3 miles. And so normally what I do is there's kind of like a little center point where you do the loop, but then there's just one path in, one path out kind of thing. You get to
Hmm.
the trail, you get to like, and you can either go one way or the other. And so what I normally do is I'll like pick one direction to go, do that loop. And then when I get back to that point, I'll turn around and go back the other way. And so you're kind of like looking at the trail that you just walked backwards,
Yeah. Right.
differently, and the cool thing is, when you're looking at it somewhat architecturally, like I do, you like see different things and you notice different stuff about it
Yeah. Going different directions. I
going
do
in
the
a
same
different
thing
direction.
on my bike. It's like you a lot of trails are what they call out and backs, right? It's just
Yeah. Yep.
one way out, one way back, not a loop at all. I
Yeah.
think what you're talking about maybe is more of like a lollipop or something like that.
Yeah. It's definitely like a lollipop. Like the head of the lollipop is where like some good elevation changes, some good rocks. You're like jumping over, or like you're like traversing some creeks and things like that. But to get some kind of like distance, you got to either do it twice or you've got to like throw a couple of other trails in the mix. But like the trails where I go in Great Falls on the Maryland side, you got like a big parking lot, and you've got like this, like if you, and this is how we discovered it, is like we were going there one time and we were going to go and just see the falls. I mean, they're great. It's
Hmm.
called Great Falls for a reason. Um, and so everybody, like, because tourists and day walkers and everything else, they all go, they want to see the falls and everything else. And so they're all going that way. And I'm like, well, I don't want to go to the crowd. And I see like this marker at the trailhead for this Ford Mine Trail. I'm like, oh, let's just do that. And so I kind of like, it's so out of the way. Nobody ever goes to it.
Hmm.
I'm like, yeah, as an introvert, this is the trail that I want to be on. I don't want to be on a trail with all of those
You
people.
need to rate an
Yeah.
introversion rating on the trails.
You know what? That would be fantastic, to be
you
quite
could
honest.
you could write a whole guidebook for the best trails for introverts.
Introvert's Guide to Trail Walking. Because it was funny. It's like, I met up with a guy from the office, and we're out there, and like we haven't like seen each other in a while. And so like we were talking, the great thing about it was is like we just talked. When you just sit around the water cooler and talk about architecture or talk about a project or talk about like whatever mood swings you kind of thing. And so it's just like,
Whatever interventions need to happen on a daily basis.
exactly. And it was so funny too, because the things that he was asking, I was just like, man, Evan and I literally just talked about this on the show
Have you heard about my
last week.
podcast?
Exactly. Which, the funny thing is it's so weird to like have friends listen to your podcast,
Yeah, I agree.
because sometimes they're like, man, you're so full of bullshit. You're like,
I
oh
find most of
yeah,
the time they don't say anything at all, but
well,
but
that's true
yeah,
too.
if you get a little feedback, hey, that's good.
Well, actually, what's funny is that there was like one of the people that I was talking about on last week's show, like had texted me, and she goes, "Hey, thanks for the shout out." And I'm like, "Oh, I wasn't talking about you." She goes, "Yes, you were." I'm like, "Yes, I was." Of
So,
course, yeah, I was,
you gotcha.
but it was kind of cool.
That's awesome.
But yeah, it was like total. In what's funny is that, like, so like I just introduced him to, as you introduced me to on the show, because it was so funny because like, so we were talking about Alex Honnold's podcast,
Hmm.
and I sort of wish that I would have listened to it before we started talking about it, but I was kind of glad that I didn't, because it was coming from like kind of like a perspective of just like, my own personal like experiences and things like that. But you are so absolutely right that, listening to his podcast, I mean, like everybody's profession, if like they all had like podcasts on talking about their profession, like you would like be able to like pull from that similarities of like how it was interesting how the let's just the what were they called, the
Stone Masters.
stone masters and stuff, like
Mm-hmm.
like so you are absolutely right, like to liken them to kind of like the old folks
The old
in
guard.
our profession, the
Yeah.
old guard in our profession,
Yeah.
of just like in how they're almost like set in their ways of like, no, this is the way you do this, and you've got to pay your dues to
We've made
get
the
to
rules.
this.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so like so I went back and even like listened, like after I listened to a couple of episodes of his podcast, I went back and listened to even our episode,
Mm.
and I was just like, man, I was like, I don't know if I would have like reacted a little bit differently by listening to his, but I was listening to like, yeah, like his take on it is almost spot on to like, like how our take was. And so like on the trail this morning when I was like, walking around with my buddy and we were talking about it, and he unsolicitedly started talking about things that you and I talked about last week.
Mm-hmm.
But it was just like, man, like it really
It's not
does,
just
like,
us. Yeah.
it's not just us. It really goes through like so many people's minds of like, is it ego? Is it fear? Is it what holds people back from like making this profession better and progressing and like contributing to it? And so we really kind of got to that like stage of like, where, I sort of want to like, maybe talk a little bit more today about it. It's just like, what, why are we holding ourselves back from making the profession better? And, who are out there that are contributing to the profession to make it better, and to not just say that, okay, this is just my information, I'm going to hold it close to my chest and I'm not going to share it with anybody else, because if I do, then, what good am I anymore?
Yeah. I think that's a great topic. I remember, I think it was Michelle Hoddle who replied on our Twitter feed, agreeing that it has to do with competitiveness. That's
Yeah.
basically bred into us throughout school and beyond. And I think she said something like, "People can't see the forest through the trees," right? Because
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting. There's definitely kind of that old guard mentality of I've figured this out, and this is a very, very analogous to being a parent, right? Which is, look, I want to help you learn everything that I've learned so that you can use that and use it as a stepping stone. And then as kids do, they rebel against that and forge a new path anyway, right?
Right.
But it's also to say that there's definitely new injections of, tech, and regulations are changing.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, climate change is the biggest problem facing our planet, not just our industry. And so you think about these things that previous generations really didn't have to deal with. It's like the rules are different now. And
Right.
and so, yeah, I feel like this episode could be like a public service announcement for the people who listen to this show, at least. Our audience, I mean, that's all we can really depend on right now. On behalf of all of the other people who are out there trying to do something for the future of this profession, right?
Right.
And it's not like all we can do is speak for ourselves, but I think it applies more broadly than just this podcast, right? So
Yeah.
I totally agree that this is a great conversation to continue on. And I think, it makes me think of, we're almost a year into being a part of the Gable Media Network. And I think about the shows that are also part of this group, this community of shows that we have on Gable. And, we know Mark LePage and Demetrius Lynch, who are the co-founders of Gable Media, and they are very like-purposed in that way. They want to see the profession get better. And because of that, they've reached out to content creators of similar like-purposedness, and they've joined the network as well. And I think that, that would be just a great place to start supporting those people. And I guess when I think about, actually, let's take a step back and just, number one, I would love to thank our listeners for going along this journey with us, and for participating with us, and for consuming this material. Like, honestly, these kinds of conversations, although many people probably, more in the quote unquote old guard will just shrug them off as, water cooler talk. They're incredibly important to put this kind of stuff out there and have these conversations in public, I think.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. So one thing that's kind of interesting, and so you mentioned Gable Media and like the kind of like the stable of podcasts that are out there. And, so we sort of started talking about like the old guard and how like the old guard is like very kind of like almost protective of their information. But one of the interesting things about like just what Mark did is like he could technically be considered old guard.
But it's a mindset more than anything else.
Exactly. But I mean, he decided that what he wants to do, and like kind of the whole point of what we do, and kind of the whole point of like, this conversation is like, who are the people out there that are theoretically the old guard or even like the new guard or that are willing to share the information that they've gained and that knowledge and that experience that they've gained and put it out there in the world so that other people either can, understand that they're not alone, that it's not just them, that, it does happen to other people, and that maybe these other people who are willing to share their voice and their ideas and experience will actually help that person kind of like weather the storms or of kind of like the profession sometimes. And then you look at like, okay, so the one that I'm like most excited about, and I don't necessarily want to turn this into a like, commercial for Gable, but is think about this. Like, so they just started the Build Smart podcast.
I was going to bring that up too.
And I was just, I mean, the former CEO of HOK is sitting down and willing to share the knowledge that has been gained throughout like, an entire generation or multiple generations of architects, and sitting down and like talking about and sharing, and not just like, protecting this knowledge and it's, just something for me, but it's like really out there for one goal. And that goal is to enrich, grow, and develop the profession to become better.
Yeah, I agree. It's incredible. I think that, and a very slight flex here. I've had a few conversations with Patrick on the phone, who is the person you're talking about here, Patrick McClamey, and 100% genuine. This is who he is. And, and so that's why I kind of get back to it's a mindset, but it's also a purposeful decision to share this information, because there are people who have the mindset of, I'm open versus closed, right? Mm-hmm. But you've got to come to me and ask. And I think that what we're talking about here is people who are purposefully putting this information out there for feedback, for conversation, intentionally to get that flowing at a higher level for our whole profession. That's the difference between it just being an open and closed mindset. It's also a purposeful putting that stuff out there.
Yeah.
The key part.
There's this other one that, I was like really, this kid, he's younger than me, so I can call him a kid. So this kid like really kind of puts himself out there.
You're just barely a teen, right? So.
Yeah. But I mean, it's just like, so this guy that I'm talking about, he has kind of like blazed a trail that is kind of like, straddled. And I always like liken this every time I talk about this guy, it like straddles between like the old guard, old tech, and new tech stuff. And it really kind of understands like where the profession was and where the profession is going. And is always, it's always impressed me from like the day that I met this guy. Like, he's always been able to share his knowledge about what he knows, what he's eager to learn, what he's eager to learn from other people, and what he's, eager to share with other people that he's either learned or he knows. And that's you. And
it's like, I was like, oh, I can't wait to find out who this is.
It was you. I mean, hell, like I edit the show and you taught me how to do that. Like I wouldn't have known how to like really begin to start doing that, but now I kind of actually love doing it because it's sort of fun to like go back and say, oh, this wasn't really like, let's get rid of that, or I can get rid of my ands and ums and and all that other stuff, and but I mean, so not only do you do this show, but you also do your Troxel show, and that one is a lot more of, I mean, I love that show. I mean, I'm not like just let me toot your horn for you for a little bit here, but I mean, the thing that I like about it is that you pull in people that not only are people that you respect in the industry, but they're also willing to do the same thing that you're willing to do, which is you're willing to share your knowledge and not just hold it dear to you, but it's look, we're all in this together. We want to elevate design. I mean, we all got into like the profession to do design work, but there are like the one mantra that I love about that you always talk about is that we got into this to do the things that we love, but along the way we kind of got stuck in this like drudgery of like all of the other things that we have to do that. But there are people out there that are helping facilitate and make us more productive in all of that other like drudgery stuff that we do or have to do or as just part of the job. And so they're looking at ways of automating. They're looking at ways of like increasing our productivity. They're looking at ways of just making things easier for us.
Yeah.
And
reduce the friction, right?
And but the problem is that like no, not very many people know like where all of this stuff is because you sort of live in the bubble of the project.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times you don't really get out of that bubble. You start to look, or like when you're looking around, you're looking at a couple of different things here, but it's just like, okay, well, I know like that I need to do a code study for this project, so I'm going to pull out the code book and I'm going to like flip through the code book and all of this other stuff. But you sit down and you like talk to people like upcodes and stuff like that are out there that are actually making it a little bit easier for you to do that. So instead of it being this weird drudgery of like, having to like, oh, I got to go do a code research, it's, oh, hey, I can go and do this. And it'll make it a lot easier for me to find the things that I need to find that are specific for the project that I need to do. And I can do all of that stuff and make that part maybe a little bit, better,
yeah,
funner,
yeah,
air quote funner, and
more funner.
More funner. And also, like take some of the time out of it. And so, being able to like identify the technology that's out there that's actually going to make our lives better so that then we can actually get to the things that we actually love to do.
Yeah.
Is great.
Imagine that.
Exactly.
I want to underline and highlight what you said, and this is definitely a mantra. Like we are all in this together, and that to me needs to be kind of put on a sticky note and put on the bottom of our monitors so that we remember that like we don't exist in our own little project bubble, our own little personal bubble, or our own little team bubble. And I guess that's one of the reasons why I felt like this public service announcement kind of idea is important to build upon last week's episode in this conversation that you're having with your buddy on the trail, which is there is so much you can do actively while still remaining kind of a passive consumer of this media, right? And that simply is like leave ratings and reviews that are positive and constructive, right? I think that, it's interesting to think of like the tens of thousands of listeners that all of these shows that we've brought up so far have, and the dearth of positive reviews and sharing about those things. And that really, I guess, is the call to action for our audience. And I'm not talking about for us. I'm talking about for the community. And I think at the end of this episode, maybe we'll just throw out some additional places where people can just begin that journey to expand. And even if you don't stay subscribed or you don't listen to more than one episode, like seriously, it takes you no pain and very little effort to leave positive reviews to help our profession get better. Because seriously, a little bit goes a long way. And what's interesting to me is like we're builders, right? We're creators.
Yeah.
Architects do that. And there is so much tearing down. And you mentioned something on the phone the other day, which was, ego getting in the way of progress. And that's what we were talking about in the last episode, right? I think we need to really focus on and own the fact that we're builders and that we need to intentionally build this up. And honestly, if you don't have something nice to say, contrary to popular belief, you don't have to memorialize it on the internet, right? This actually is about the greater good, and you have to put yourself in other people's shoes and help them get where they are going, and that's leadership. Like remove red tape, grease it, reduce friction, Give them a 5-star review. Give them a positive comment. It's like, seriously, most of these people are doing this for zero money on the side of their normal job so that the profession gets better,
Right.
because they have a vision for that. And they need positive, constructive feedback. That it just feeds them, because they're not getting paid with dollars to do it. I think a lot of people maybe think they are, and they're like, oh, you don't need me to help you make more money on the side. It's like, no, seriously, these people are putting themselves out there. We're putting ourselves out there all the time. And I think that it's super important that it's so easy for people to help that cause. And so I want to make this really positive. Like, this is for us, the big us, the profession, and we are all in this together.
When you said the greater good, I was like, the greater good. From a hot fuzz.
I think, like, you can't just sit there and don't say anything at all. Like, that's actually just the opposite of supporting, right? And there's a lot of people who do that, and they think, yeah, this is good stuff. Like, I like to listen to it. I like to consume it. But honestly, just find 3 different content creators that you support. They could be podcasts, they could be YouTube, they could be all kinds of things. They could be tutorial makers, you know? They could be software people, they could be tech people who are making, you know, like the Hypar folks or the test fit folks or the upcodes. You like, they went through serious legal battles because the ICC wants to copyright the freaking building code, a code that everybody in the US has to follow, is forced to follow. They want to copyright it. It's like, it's a law, dude. Right? It is pretty crazy, but just to point point out the fact that a company like Upcodes, who's trying to make things better for our profession, to make it easier for people to understand and use the building code, they could use some thumbs up for sure. And I know they get it from a very small kind of cohort of architectural technologists on Twitter, right? But that's a very small group. Like, these are the kinds of things that actually are moving our profession forward in a meaningful way. And so to me, that's the kind of thing that you could support out there very easily.
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to it, to move us forward. This positive step forward is about knowledge sharing.
Yeah.
It's not knowledge hoarding, it's knowledge sharing. And,
what good is it if you go to the grave with that information, right?
Exactly. It's just like, okay, so you did a good job, but here's an interesting one. There, you've heard many a story of, like, an architect that had a successful practice and stuff. Whoever didn't really plan for succession of the firm, and so it ultimately dies. And so it literally does go to the grave with them. And
I'm looking at the drafting table. Drafting table, grave. What's the difference?
And it's just like, what is the point of that? Like, okay, so you made this mark on the profession, but then you took it with you. Yeah. And that just leaves kind of like a scar on the profession, because rather than enriching and growing and like creating like a bunch of other people to, like, take your mantra of like good, competent, successful, well-designed, beautifully integrated, whatever, you can add whatever else describers to it as you want. But since you didn't leave that behind, and you just kind of like, then what mark did you really leave on the profession?
Yeah.
And for those people who are like really, as you said, putting themselves out there for free, really, to basically share their knowledge and share their experience and share the wealth of like all of the different projects and things like that they've done, so that the next person can be better about it. It just, I mean, I love, like, there's so much content out there that actually makes our profession so much better. I remember we were in, where were we at? We were at a conference. We were being interviewed, and they were asking us what was like the your most useful tool.
Oh yeah, and construct.
Yeah, thank you. And you answered
YouTube.
And it's interesting because you can go onto YouTube and you can really look at all of the different people on YouTube that, like, hell, I passed my AREs by YouTube.
That's awesome.
But
did you take 9 tests, Cormac? Because if you didn't take 9 tests, I don't want to talk to you.
But I mean, it's just like we cobbled together. There was enough people out there talking about AREs or specific things, or engineers out there talking about like structures or this, that, and you can cobble together all of this information. And they're not putting it out there to like earn $1 or anything like that. They're trying to help their profession as much as we're trying to help ours. And so, like people out there putting this content out there to be able to do that, I mean, there are like dedicated resources for taking the ARE and things like that. And those are extremely valuable in their own right. But, then there's just like the, kind of like the shade tree content creator that they go out there and they're not doing it for a buck. They're doing it because they want to do that. I mean,
those people on Quizlet app who are making ARE flashcards and just giving them away so that people can study.
Exactly. Thank you, Quizlet, because I sure in the hell use those too.
Yep.
When I was, studying for my exams, I was using stuff like that. I cobbled together so much information that I found out there. I can't even remember this one lady's name. She did these great notes about all the different
Jenny's
stuff.
notes,
yeah. Thank you, Jenny's notes. And
I don't know how I remember all that. I think all of these resources were actually in the ARE hacks book, but but yeah, they're like right there.
They were, And speaking of another one, people who like sit down and write a content down because they've like gone through the process. They've, they're people who are coming to these tests with so many different walks of lives, and just, like setting up a way to like just get your mind right to like take these tests, because they tend to be daunting sometimes. Some dude like wrote this book called ARE Hacks, which was literally about like not necessarily about giving you content to study for the test. It was giving you content of how to study for the test and how to get your like mind right and how to get your life right to be able to like basically like organize yourself to do that and also live a life.
Yeah.
I don't know if that is. I mean, some dude.
Link in show notes. Link in show notes.
Link in show notes. Yeah.
I think one of the other things that there's definitely a way for people to give people thumbs up and stars and a little positive critique or positive feedback. But I think another thing that people can do is just share things that are interesting to you, to your friends and colleagues, right? Absolutely. That's another way of supporting these content creators, is to spread the word, right? It's a big deal. And by doing the things that we talked about a minute ago with the likes and the thumbs up and the stars, that helps other people find this content when they're searching for it online. It helps these algorithms that all of these platforms use to display recommended shows, because they do know things about people. They do know what their interests are. They do know what their careers are in. So if you're out there kind of helping that algorithm understand that you as an architect also like these shows or this content, then other people like you might like them too, right? And so by doing that, you're kind of helping that system target the right people, which is great. You can also just directly share this stuff, right? And I think that that's a great way to do it, is just, share a podcast, share an episode, share a snippet of an episode. Hey, would you be interested in this? I found it fascinating. We should talk about this kind of stuff in our office, on the trail, wherever that is. I think that those are great things to do.
Yeah.
I feel like referrals, in architecture, most of our small firm, and I guess probably medium and large firm people too, know that referrals are the best kind of jobs, right? You don't have to do all that marketing over. Yeah. So I would love it if our audience could be a referral generator for the future of our profession.
Yep.
Right. Sharing the information that we talk about, not just us, but these other shows. Let's do like a lightning round of different shows or pieces of content or things that are out there. We've already mentioned a few, and we'll put those in the podcast. But I think, going back to the Gable Media, there's Practice Disrupted. That's a fantastic podcast. So I'll just start there. Janine Chastain and Evelyn Lee are doing an amazing job with that. And I would highly recommend Practice Disrupted podcast. And you can find that wherever you can find podcasts.
Well, you were talking about the marketing and stuff like that. Another good one, and we'll go ahead and stick with our home brand here, but Build a Brand podcast by Jeff Eck.
Mm-hmm.
He's always talking about like the how to market yourself and how to get yourself out there so that, you can generate these leads and, these references and recommendations. And he's not just doing it for himself, but he's also pulling in experts and stuff and talking about them. And he's even created a clubhouse coffee talk every morning.
Mm-hmm.
And I've dropped into a few of those, and they're fantastic conversations, which is just light conversations talking about, how people can grow their business. And, so it's a good way of just like throwing things out there.
I had a Zoom call with the three women of She Builds podcast, and it was a lovely conversation. It was so fun. There's so much energy there, so much passion for the profession. So I would love it if people would give that podcast a listen to. She Builds. It's 10 episodes per kind of season, and they do 2 seasons, I guess, per year. I don't know if I'm using the right words there, but 2 groups of 10, and they research them. Each host does 3 of the episodes, and they're heavily researched and presented, and then they do kind of a wrap up at the end. So that's what makes the 10 episodes. And I just thought it was a really interesting idea, and the amount of effort that they're putting into this, again, just on the side, something that they're doing. And they're all in completely different locations, like you and I are, and East Coast, West Coast, splitting it up. I think they're like in 3 different corners of the U.S. It's just absolutely fantastic. They all met in school, and they've kept this relationship going beyond that into this podcast, and they're sharing some amazing content.
So I'm going to go a little bit outside of the podcast world and go to YouTube. And I'm going to steal one from you because I know you got it queued up if you don't. But Eric Reinhold's 30 by 40 is my Lord.
Eric, he's doing like cinema.
He's doing the Lord's work there. I mean, because just the things that he talks about, and it's conversations that you have, and you're just like, yeah, I've been there. I mean, if you just go to like his very first one, and I believe God, I'm blanking on it. It's like, so you want to be an architect or something thereof, but it's just this great introduction to, basically sitting there saying the reason why I do this is because I went into the profession with kind of like this joy and passion for the profession. But then when I got into the profession, it kind of didn't really work the same way that I thought it was going to be. And so I kind of took hold of my own career, so it was almost like this inspirational talk. It's just like, dude, where were you when I was like,
mm-hmm.
And he just talks about like so many different passions that just seem so in align with like the things that like you and I like absolutely love.
I had him on my other podcast, and it was just the most fun conversation he's a great guy to talk to. He loves, I
got to meet this dude someday.
He loves metal.
Yeah.
And I don't mean the material, but the material too, but I mean the music.
Yeah.
But yeah, Eric's a fantastic example. One of the things that I love about YouTube is that it's like you can learn anything on YouTube from teachers you actually like. That's what I've heard it put recently, and I thought that's fantastic, right? Because a lot of times you're in school and you get stuck with teachers. You get stuck with you feel it, you know what it's like, and then every once in a while you get a great teacher. But on YouTube, there's so much content out there. You can actually find somebody you actually want to learn from. Eric is totally that person. Right. I have another one for you on YouTube, which is the Archispeak Marathon channel. And it's 2 Australian architects, and just fantastic content. And they're walking around, they're talking, they're having a conversation like we are, but they're addressing kind of specific topics within their episodes. And it's just, you can totally geek out on the stuff that they're talking about. And they just super down to earth conversations. I love one of their episodes recently where it's like sustainability is like teenage sex. Everybody says they're doing it, but they're but they're not, right? It's talking about sustainability in architecture and what is and what is not, and what people are just paying as lip service versus people actually doing it.
Yeah. So I'll tell you what was interesting is one of the first like YouTube architects that I was just introduced to is, Doug Pat's How to Architect. And I love how he goes through and he talks about like all of the different things that you experience, very much like Eric's in in a completely different way from Eric, but in a very kind of like personable and like receiving way. And so, I love that, that's out there.
Yeah, I love that. I love the stuff that he's doing, and he's actually setting up a camera and drafting on his table and showing you why we do things, like how this information gets passed along from architect to architect in that apprenticeship model that we briefly discussed in the last episode.
And then there's another like opportunity out there that, especially since COVID hit, that everything's turned virtual, and so now there's a way to like just basically have kind of like, one of the things that we loved when we were in school was, we loved, or maybe you didn't, I don't know, I loved them, was when you had like all of these lecturers come in and they would sit there and they would talk about like all of these things. And so
totally,
I've attended a couple of like online lectures from Yale School of Architecture when they had Marlon Blackwell on there, and so they had their series, but rather than it just being a series that was isolated to just like Yale School of Architecture students, they actually opened it up to other ones. And then there's places like Architalks, and it's TALX is the talks part, and that was a series of lectures that architects in Portland, Maine, basically did. They like gathered around and they like had like basically a lecture series and stuff. And now that lecture series has hit the road. And so now anybody can join in and listen to them and listen to these lectures and stuff. And there's just like these, I don't know, I always looked at lectures as being like these wonderfully soul enriching kind of experiences and stuff. And, having access to all of these different lectures or all of these different YouTube channels or podcasts and stuff is just, I always find them is like, that needed, like respite from, sometimes the, just the daily grind of some things. You just need to like step back and, you're not frustrated with architecture, but you just want to kind of like reinvigorate yourself with, like what other people are doing.
Yeah.
And like for them to put the content out there, it's just amazing that they're putting the content out there for everybody to, just have some positive growth experience.
You mentioned ARE Hacks, but I'll mention another one that's in the book realm and away from the screens here is, we talked about this in our Gifts for Architects episode too, Laura's alphabet book, little alphabet, right? And it's like, it's another way to share the joy, the interest, the building blocks of architecture with a very young audience in this case, right? But again, doing this thing on the side, just doing a thing that she wanted to do. Right. And so buy the book, give it to a kid, any kid, right? Like this is the kind of thing that helps our profession in the future. This gets back to that idea of being the referral generator of the future of our profession. It's like all of this stuff is planting seeds for the future of our profession, the future generations, the future workers within our profession.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. So just go out there, look around. You can do a web search for architectural podcasts. You can do a web search for architectural YouTube. And you can do a web search for all these different companies that are out there to try to enrich our lives and make daily lives of the profession better. So just reach out there and as Evan said, definitely give them a thumbs up, give them a like, give them positive feedback and help. Let's like turn this profession into something that we all love instead of just something that we do to, grab a paycheck.
Yeah. So we'll have links to all these ones that we recommended in our show notes for this. So if you don't know where to start, that's a great place to start. And honestly, just why don't we do the call to action? Leave 3 positive feedbacks for these out there. And none of these things that we talked about today, nobody knows we're talking about this. Nobody asked us to talk about this. This is totally coming from us. We would love it if all of these people saw a spike in their recommendations, in their shares, in their ratings, in their comments. And there would be, let's pay it forward. I think it would be fantastic if our listeners at the end of this episode right now just pause this, or as soon as it's done, just go out and click on 3 of these links, listen to the content. If you like it, leave a positive feedback. If you don't like it, move on. Find another one.
Change the channel.
Change the channel. Yeah,
Swipe
exactly.
Right.